Hello, my name is Jahg and welcome back to the next episode of Jahg Teaches Java. Now in the last episode we were mucking about with configuration files. We had little plugins such as this which use the file class, the file configuration class and the YAML configuration class to construct a file called playerdata.yml, and whenever someone would join we would add to that file information about when they last joined, and when they last fished, and when they last broke a block, and so on. And you could see that it was fairly structured the way it handles it. So in the onEnable, we create the config file if it wasn't there. In playerJoin event, we then use that config file directly, playerdataconfig.set, and the .set method itself, you give it the name of the path, the name of the option you're setting, and then a value. And the same is true with onPlayerFish and onBlockBreak and so on. That's how it works. And it created a config file inside a folder which was called the same as the plugin, so that it's organized. Now, we were going to use that next. In fact, we are going to use that next. I'm going to show you what we're going to use it for. At the moment, I've got a finished version of this particular plugin, so if I just log into the server here, and then once it's loaded some terrain, the plugin is called MyLists, and what it does is it keeps lists of stuff. So I can create a new list called test. I don't know, that'll do. I can then select that list. Oh, my lists, select list, test. Here we are. And then I can add new items to it. My lists, new item. Hello. Here we go. And I'll add another item just for the sake of it. Strawberries. There we are. So I've added some items to the list. I also want to be able to view the lists. So I should just be able to do view list and it will show me them. And you can see them there. List. Oh, it's got the wrong name there. Oops. That should really be the name of the actual list. 2 items in this list, and there they are. Okay, that's reasonable. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about lists in this episode. So I'm first of all going to disconnect from that because I don't need that running. And we'll make a start on this. So I've already got a project set up, so I'm going to expand this. I'm going to make it the active project, and then we'll see what we've got. Once again, I've got the Bukkit library in there. That's the only one we're interested in using at this point. And I've got my plugin config file. Here it is. I may need to close this down so that it's not so laggulous. There we go. So here's the plugin configuration file. You can see I've got a single command, but I'm going to use these sub-options, you see, to actually get to the different parts of this thing. Makes a list of anything. I've added some aliases, so we can use these instead of the words mylists to access the command itself. Nothing particularly novel in there. So that's that. In addition to that, I have some basic code in here and some comments that are going to help us decide what we're going to do with this plugin. So I know I'm going to use events, such as when the player joins, it's got to load up their list of lists. So I've got this implements listener thing going on. I know I'm going to need files of some sort, so I'm going to need a reference to the folder that they're stored in. So remember, files and folders are the same thing to Java. So I've got this bit of code that just grabs the data folder. So that gets us a reference to the mylists folder itself, which is this one. By the way, there is the data file it created. It uses the person's name. So each player gets their own file. There's the format of the file it's going to generate. mylists.lists.test. Remember, that was the name of the list I created. And these were the 2 items I added to that list. The items can have spaces, the list names can't. So that's what we've got going on there. I'll leave that there because I might flip back to that. I've hooked up to the events list, even though I'm not actually handling any at the moment, I don't think. Oh, yeah, I am. I'm handling the basic onPlayer join. I create their data file. This is how we do that. Remember, we use the file object. Create a new file based on this folder, and then this file name. And this is how we're going to get the player's name and add .yml on the end, so that every player gets their own name, their own file. If the folder doesn't exist, it creates the folder. If the file doesn't exist, it creates the file. Basic code that we've used before. I'm going to hook into the onPlayer quit as well, I think. So I'm going to need to do something there. That's all the code I've got at the moment there. The majority of this though is in commands. So, or one command with lots of subcommands. So I've overridden, remember it's not an event, but it is a built-in part of the Java plugin class. I've overridden the built-in onCommand method, which takes a sender, which is us in this case, it takes a command, it takes the name of the command, and it takes some extra info about the command. So I'm only going to be able to use this in-game, so not from console. So I've made sure that they are a player, and we did this before in a previous one. Then I need to check the command they're running. Well, we've only got one command at the moment, but if the label equals my lists, and I'm using the equals ignore case because I don't care whether they type part of it in capitals or lower, whatever, so long as it's equal somehow to my lists, then this code is going to handle it. Well, that's fine. Now we've got to decide what we want the plugin to do. I've grabbed a reference to the player because I'm going to need that all over the place. Now, each time they use the command, I'm going to dig out their file. Not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it, but it works, and it will work for a large number of players fairly efficiently. So once again, I grab a reference to the player's list file. There it is, using their name plus the .yml extension. I then open it or load the configuration from that file using the YML stuff, the YAML configuration class we've seen before. That's going to give us access to the actual data in the file. Now here is a list of the things I want this plugin to do. You see it's all the same command, my list, and so on. Actually it's my lists, isn't it? Let's correct that now. The actual details of what it's going to do, there are 3 commands that are to do with managing lists. I want to create new ones, remove existing ones, or select one. And they all require 2 parameters then. One of the actual command, one of the list name that I want to work with. The next part, these are 2 commands I want to work on items. They also take 2 parameters. One is the subcommand, new item or remove item, and one is the actual value that we're working from. So how do we know which particular list we're working with? Because we want to be able to add items to unlimited numbers of lists. I could have a test list as I have here, but I might also want to create a second list, test B, which has a different set of values within it, and this is perfectly valid stuff. So that's what I want to be able to do. So how will add item and remove item know I'm dealing with this list as opposed to this list? Well, the way we're going to do that is by using this select list command that's listed here. So that once I've selected it, the game has got to remember my list. So we're going to need to have lists of lists. That's what's going to be involved here. So I want to be able to remove items, add items. There's one final command which is to do with viewing the actual list, and you saw me use it right there. And I want it to be used in 2 different ways. If I just do my lists, view list, I want it to show me the currently selected list. If I haven't selected one, it should show me an error. Or rather, in addition, I also want to be able to do view list, give it a list name, and it will pick out that specific list. So if I've got this one selected, I can use view list and give it this name, and it will pull out this list instead to give me the maximum flexibility in this particular plugin. Alright. Now, here's the basic framework of how we're going to work this out. If the arguments have a length of greater than or equal to 2, meaning there are at least 2 items after the command name, then it's going to be one of these, or it's going to be one of these, but it's not going to be this one without a list name. Now, I've done greater than 2 because the items I add to the list can have multiple words. So this would be 2 separate arguments here. So it's greater than or equal to 2. Now here are my subcommands: new list, remove list, select list, new item, remove item, and view list. Remember, view list can work with the list name, so that's 2 arguments. If it's none of them, I'm going to give an error message. If there's only one argument, let's see if it's view list, and if so, go and display that one that they've already selected. That's how it's going to work. I don't think there's anything else in here. So in order to do any of this, I'm going to need to start off with some information about lists, and I'm only going to show the basics here, and then we'll do this actual plugin, the details of it, in the next episode probably. Now, lists are amazing. There are various types of them. We've already seen the very basic type of list, which is this one, which is called an array, which allows you to store multiple values in one bit of memory, and it gives each one a number. So in this particular case, args is automatically filled in with all the information that the user provides about their command here. So this becomes args0, this becomes args1, and if there were more words it would be 2, 3, and so on. But arrays, they're very quick to use and quick to manipulate, but they're not very dynamic. I can't add new items into an existing array without deleting the entire array, recreating it. Instead, there are things called lists. Now, even though this command is all about lists that I'm doing here, the types of lists I'm using are only going to be one or two of the actual types that exist. For instance, there is a class called an ArrayList. Now, ArrayLists allow you to store a single list of items. For instance, I can create an ArrayList of type string. I will call it, I don't know, names. And I'll set it equal to a new ArrayList typed to use strings in particular, and that's it. That creates an ArrayList. Now, in order to use it, I'm going to need to control space on this and import this item, which is java.util ArrayList. It allows us to use it. It puts in the import for it up here. Right? So I've got my list. Now, at the moment, it's totally blank. To get items in it, you use the name of the list, .add. And you can see here we've got add, and we've got add with a number of some sort, and we can add all and give it a whole set. Well, I'm just going with the basics. So what do I want to add? I want to add hello. Oh gosh, that's got to be a string. Now these have to be strings because I said that this was an array list of type string. And we'll see later that we can make that any type we like. So I'm just going to add a couple of items, add another item here called, I don't know, goodbye. There we go. Not particularly useful list. We can add as many items as we want. Now, in many other languages, we can also insert. That's not an option we can do in Java. We can, however, use add. Oh, let's bring that back and use this second option, which allows us to insert an item at a given location within an existing list. So we've got an index number of some sort and then the item I want to add. Now, as you can see, it's inserting. So this is how we can get an item in between two existing ones. Now they're still 0 based, so this will be 0, this will be item 1. So if I want to add an item at position 1, I think this should be right, I can do that by writing, I don't know, something like that. So we've got names, add, index 1, and then the new item. So now I've got a list of 3 items, which is great. Now the next thing you need to know is how do you loop through them. I think we've done this a previous time with a different example, but there are various ways we can loop through an array list. The most common is to use a for loop such as this, where you specify that it's full of strings, so we need a variable of that type. I'm just calling it S for now. Then you need the actual name of the array list, and then we can use it. So this says basically for each string in this set, grab one of them, call it S temporarily, and then loop through them. So it's going to grab the word hello, put it into this S variable so I can do things with it. For instance, I can, what do I want to do? For now, I'm just going to display it. Hang on, what do I want to do? Yeah, that is what I want to do. I'm just going to display it in the console using very basic debugging code such as this. I'm just going to display it directly like that. System.out.println and then give it the actual string to display, and it will show up in here in the console. Now, it's not good to leave too much of that in there because you don't want your console window to fill up with tat too easily. So for now, that's all I'm going to do with this, and let's just see if we actually can display our list, and we'll see the actual pattern that it produces, the pattern. So I'm just going to build that. Come on, build. Now this is just one example of a type of list. We're going to see another example in a minute. I'm just going to paste it into my update folder. I've already got a version of this plugin already in there. You see, that's why I needed to update it. I'm going to reload it, and you can see there's our list displayed right here. So you can see that we built our list, we've put in hello, goodbye, and then we inserted at index number 1, we inserted the value something. So we've got hello at position 0, something, and then goodbye. So we've got a list and we can display them. That's progress. Now, another thing you can do with lists, all lists, they work basically the same way. If we can add things, we should be able to remove them. And you can see there are 3 ways of doing this. We can remove all and you give it a set of values. Not going to do that yet. You can remove it based on an index number. So I could say remove item at position 1 and it would remove the word something. Or you can give it the actual value that you want it to remove. Now in our case, let's try removing the value of goodbye. That's what we'll do. And then I will redisplay the list. That's all I'm going to do. So let's pop that in there. I'll need some way of indicating that something has happened in between. Let's just do a system.out.println right here that just outputs, I don't know, some dashes or something, just to separate it so we know that the output from this is finished and the output for this is about to begin. So if I build this, it should only take a moment because it's updating. And then I can copy this into my update folder, reload, and there it is. And there's our original list with items 0, 1 and 2. Then my separator, and then I got hello and something. So it removed the goodbye item, just like we said it should. So we can create an empty list, we can add items to it, we can insert items within it to reorder the items, we can use a loop to display the items, or indeed for any other purpose. This will loop through all the items in that array list, and we can remove items and then redisplay it. That's what we've got going on here. Now, that's great, that's good, and we're going to use lists in a similar way to this. Array lists are just one example. I'm going to create a new list going on here just to demonstrate one other thing. If I go for an array list of integers, which I will call, I don't know, ages, equals new array list, you have to specify the data type. There we go. Now, when I do ages.add, you can see that it's going to force it to be an integer of some sort, a whole number, because the word hello is not an acceptable integer, which I think makes a kind of sense. Oh, hang on, I can't use int, I've got to use integer, the full word here. Because these lists, they only work with certain data types. They work with a lot of different data types, but only with reference types, which I'll explain later on. So strings it works with, integer it works with, which means a whole number, but as you can see from here, it's unsuitable. I can't put the word hello in there because it's not an integer, which I think makes perfect sense. So I can do something like, I don't know, 90 should be a valid value, and it will take that 90 and it will convert it to an integer value and it will store it in my list. So I can have a list of numbers if I wanted to do so. So I could do something, I don't know, whatever with that. Maybe you're storing a list of block IDs that you want to allow the users to use in your game or to disallow them from using. So you need a list of those IDs that you're allowing. This will allow you to do that. The same is true for when you want to iterate through them. So integer I, ages, it wasn't really ages, I guess, it was just something else, and then we can display it or do something else with it. That's how we use an array list. Now array lists are very useful because they're a very quick way of storing values. One of the issues with them though is you can only store one value. Sometimes, so one type of value, so one column of figures or one list of words as I've got here. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you want to use 2 different values. For instance, in this example of our My Lists plugin, I'm going to need to store a list of all the players who are currently connected and which list they have selected each. So that's 2 different values. I could do that with 2 separate array lists, but I can also do it in a much more efficient way using a different type of list called a HashMap. Now that's what I'm going to go for. Once again, I need to import the actual file for it. So Control Space brings up that list, and I want to press Enter to select that. So a HashMap requires 2 values here. Let's see if I can get it to bring up that value, there we go, it requires two values, you saw there. The first value is the keys. Well, I'm going to use strings for that. The second value is the actual values themselves. I'm going to use strings again. Now, I'll show you what this is going to do for us in a moment. Now, let's call this, I don't know, things. And I'll create a new hash map for that. It needs the data types again. With newer versions of Java, we can actually skip some of these and it will interpret this automatically for us. So that's created a new list which essentially has two columns. The first column is the strings for the key value, the key, and the second one is the strings for the value. So essentially we've got two columns. You can't just comma and build this up again, unfortunately. It's not quite the way it works, but that's how we're going to use it. Oop. So the way we add items to this is we need the name of the list, and you can see there is no add with this. There is a remove, but there's no add. Instead of add, there's get and put, are the ones we're going to use here. We're going to use put. And you can see it's automatically templated this for us to strings for the keys because of that, and strings for the values because of that. So the way we use this is dot put, because we're putting an item into this map, into this list. Then we give it a name, I don't know, jahg, and then we give it a value. Hello! Why not? There we are. So that's how we add items to this list. And of course we can have as many items as we need in a list. I'll put another item, I don't know, jahgbot. Hello again. It's making up some stuff now. Toast. Let's get rid of that. I don't know, whatever. There we go. So we've made a list of things, and each item in this list has one value. These are keys and values. If I were later to do the same line of code again and do things.put, put my own name in again, and then put a new value, something else, there we go, the original value is overwritten. So, oh, it would if I spelled that correctly, there we go. So, with a hash map, you have one key value and one value that goes with it. So, this line of code will overwrite the value of hello with the word something else. If you put an item into a hash map that's already there, it gets overwritten. If you put an item that isn't already there, it adds it as a new item. Now, with hash maps, we can loop through them, but the way we do that is a bit different. And in our particular case, we're not going to need to loop through them. I'll show in a next example possibly the way you'd loop through a hash map. But with our example, what we're going to need a hash map for is to store just one value. So the way we actually use this in our code is we will do something such as, I don't know, let's just display the value. So for now I'll do a system out print line, and we'll pull out from our list a particular values. How do we do that? We do things.get, and you can see it requires only one parameter, and that is the key value that you want to pull out. So let's pull out Havoc.gb. It's a string, so there we go, Havoc.gb, and we'll see what it displays for this last value. Now, once again, I'm going to need to have like a separator, so I'm just going to borrow this line of code, I think. Yes, let's borrow that and pop it down here to separate out our output in the window over here. So if I build this, I should now get, hopefully, no errors, but I should also get, where is it? There it is. I should also get it displaying the value in my hash map that goes with this person's name. So there it is, it's built. Let's see if I've mangled anything. Let's go in here. I will reload because that's what causes this code to run. And there we go. There's our list, there's our second list, and here's our hash map value. So it looked up the person's name here and pulled out the word from here, which is amazing. And that's what we're going to need for our list command. So when I select a list in game, I need to store jahg and then the name of the list that I've selected, because the other commands are going to need it. So that's as far as we're going with this particular example. I've shown two different types of lists, both of which we're going to need. An array list, which is a very simple type of list, it stores one after the other. And we've got a hash map, which is a bit more complicated of a list. It allows you to have a key and a single value that goes with it. The actual data types I've used here, strings with lists of strings, that's perfectly fine. As you see here, it works perfectly. Nothing prevents you having a key that is actually an integer value of some sort, or rather, it's moaning because I haven't updated it here, and a value that's of a different type. So you could actually have a hash map that contains an integer list of arrays, which is interesting. So it's perfectly valid to do that. We're going to need both of these types in our next example. So hopefully you followed along. I'll have this code as it is here in the video description, so you can pull it out from there if you didn't follow along yourself. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.